I started hiking alone in Vermont's Green Mountains early one morning, just after sunrise. The sky was still pale, and the trail was damp from the night's rain. The air smelled like wet earth and pine, cool and quiet, with nothing but the soft crunch of my boots on the trail and the occasional bird call. I'd been planning the trip for weeks. Just a 2-day hike through one of the quieter sections of the forest. No real destination, just walking, camping, and clearing my head. I hadn't seen another person since I left the small parking area at the trailhead hours earlier. It was around mid-morning when I noticed him. A man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a bright orange hunting cap. He was a good distance behind me, maybe 100 yards or so. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's not uncommon to see hunters or hikers out here. I figured he'd pass me eventually, or maybe veer off on another trail. But he didn't pass me. He didn't fall behind either. No matter how fast or slow I walked, he stayed the same distance behind me. I'd speed up for 10-15 minutes, then slow down, stop to drink water, even pause to check the map. Every time I looked back, he was there, not moving closer, not falling back, just there. Something about the way he moved unsettled me. He wasn't carrying anything, no pack, no walking stick, no water bottle. Just a dark coat, jeans, and that orange cap. That stood out the most. It was too bright, almost jarring against the greens and browns of the woods. I remember thinking it was probably a hunter's hat, which made sense at first, but the longer he followed me, the less sense anything made. Around noon, I reached a fork in the trail. The left path curved along a ridge. The right one dipped into a narrow valley and eventually looped back. I chose the ridge, hoping the higher ground would let me keep better sight behind me. For a while, I didn't look back. I didn't want to see him again. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe he was just hiking the same trail. But when I stopped at a small overlook to tie my boot, I snuck a glance back. There he was, standing still in the middle of the trail, maybe 50 yards back now, closer than before. He wasn't adjusting anything, wasn't pretending to be interested in the view. He was just staring directly at me, not moving. His face was blank, but his eyes were locked on me, like he didn't care if I saw him staring. My stomach dropped. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pack and started walking fast, then faster. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to run. Not yet, but every instinct told me I should get away. I kept thinking maybe he was just weird. Maybe he didn't realize how creepy he was being. Maybe it was just some guy who didn't like people and wanted space. But then why hadn't he taken a different trail? Why hadn't he passed me? I left the main trail, took a narrow game path that barely looked walked. I followed it through thick underbrush, across a shallow creek, then up a steep, rocky hill. I didn't care where I was going, just that I was getting away. I moved fast and quiet, listening for sounds behind me. I stopped often, hiding behind trees or boulders, trying to hear if he was still following. But I heard nothing. No footsteps. No snapping twigs. Just wind in the trees and the occasional bird call. I kept going until I was sure I'd lost the trail completely. I climbed to a spot with some fallen logs and thick pines and decided to make camp there. It wasn't ideal. Uneven ground, barely room for my tent, but it felt hidden, remote. I pitched the tent slowly, taking time to listen every few minutes. I still felt that prickling sense that someone was nearby, but I didn't see anyone. Didn't hear anything unusual. I made a small fire, more out of habit than comfort, and boiled water for dinner. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I felt more alone than I had all day. I didn't light the fire again after eating. I didn't want to draw attention. I sat in my tent with the rainfly rolled back, watching the trees as they faded into shadow. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I knew that part of Vermont was remote, but I hadn't expected to feel so isolated. It felt like I was on another planet. Then, just after the last bit of light disappeared, I heard twigs snapping. Not far, maybe 20 feet from my tent. My body froze. The snapping was slow and spaced out, like someone was carefully walking around, trying not to make noise but failing just enough to be heard. I grabbed my knife from my pack and sat there, completely still, listening. My heart was hammering in my ears. I turned off my headlamp and held my breath. There were no voices, No breathing, just the occasional soft snap of a twig or a shift of leaves. It circled. I could tell by the direction of the sound. It moved around my tent, slow, steady, pausing at times. Once, it stopped completely for what felt like 10 minutes. Then a branch cracked, closer this time. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't even shift positions. I just sat there with the knife tight in my hand, muscles locked, every nerve in my body on fire. Eventually, the sounds faded. Whether the person had walked off or was still standing nearby, I didn't know. But the rest of the night passed in silence. I didn't sleep. I barely blinked. As soon as the sky turned gray with dawn, I packed everything as fast as I could. No breakfast, no coffee. I didn't even properly roll up the tent, just stuffed it into my pack and got moving. I found the creek again and followed it downstream until I reconnected with the main trail. About a mile down, I passed through a patch of soft earth near an old stump. That's when I saw the prints. Fresh boot tracks. Not mine. The treads were different. Wider. Deeper. They circled the flat spot where I had set my tent, walked around it in a full loop. Twice. Then they veered off back into the woods. I stared at them for a long time. My own prints had been nearly erased by the shifting dirt and rain, but his were clear. Deep. Clean. They hadn't been there the night before when I set up camp. I was sure of it. That meant he'd come sometime after I'd already been in the tent. After dark. I didn't stop walking after that. I didn't even look back. I made it to my car by early afternoon, soaked in sweat and running mostly on adrenaline. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the rearview mirror, expecting to see that orange cap again. But the woods behind me were still. I never called the cops. What would I even say? A guy followed me in the woods. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't touched me. But something about it wasn't right. It wasn't just weird. It felt intentional. Controlled. Like he knew what he was doing. I still think about him sometimes. The way he kept his distance. The way he stared. The way he moved around my camp in the dark without ever making a sound I could fully place. I've hiked since then, but never alone. And never in Vermont. I was volunteering with a trail maintenance crew up in Northern California, somewhere in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. It was early fall, the air dry, cool at night, and the forest thick with the smell of pine, dust, and dry bark. There were 6 of us total, 2 crew leaders from the Conservation Corps and 4 volunteers, including me. I signed up for a 2-week stint. Nothing fancy, just clearing brush, cutting deadfall, redigging drainage on switchbacks. That sort of thing. I wasn't new to the woods. I'd hiked and camped plenty, but this was the first time I was out in the backcountry for this long, sleeping in a tent every night, far from any road or signal. We were camped along a ridgeline, maybe 8 or 9 miles in from the nearest trailhead. Our tents were spaced out around a central cooking area where we had a fire ring and hung our food in bare bags. Every morning, we woke up around 6, made oatmeal, filled our water bottles from a nearby creek, and started work by 7. We kept to a routine: eat, work, break, work, eat, sleep. It was tiring but peaceful in a way. The days passed slow and quiet. The only sounds were the scraping of tools, wind in the trees, and the occasional woodpecker hammering on a trunk. On the 5th night, I got up around 2 or 3 a.m. to relieve myself. I walked maybe 50 yards from my tent, past the last guy's bivvy, and found a patch of soft dirt near a cluster of trees. As I stood there in the dark, staring into nothing, I noticed a soft orange glow on the far side of the ridge. At first, I thought it was the moonlight hitting something weird, but then it flickered. Firelight. I squinted and saw it clearer. A small campfire, just beyond the curve of the ridge, maybe 200 yards away. It wasn't large, just enough to throw light around a small clearing. The thing was, we knew no one else was supposed to be out there. The whole section of trail was closed for repairs. We hadn't seen or heard another group all week. The crew leads had checked permits and maps before we even set up camp. That area, especially that ridge, was supposed to be empty. I walked back to camp quietly and woke one of the leads. He looked, saw the glow too, and got on the radio. He reported it to the Forest Service. They didn't pick up, it was late, but he left a message. We all stood around in the dark for a bit, waiting to see if someone would walk toward us, or if the fire would grow or die. Nothing happened. Eventually, we went back to sleep, and by morning, the fire was gone. We hiked up to the spot after breakfast. There was no tent, no gear, no people, just a blackened patch of earth, still faintly warm to the touch. The grass around it was unburned, and the scorch mark was an almost perfect circle. That detail stuck with me. It wasn't a typical fire shape, no spreading or uneven edges like you'd see if someone had let a fire burn uncontrolled. Just a neat, round patch, maybe 6 feet across. We talked about it over lunch. Someone suggested a lightning strike, but the sky had been clear for days. Another guy joked it was a drone drop or some weird military thing. No one took it too seriously, but everyone was uneasy. Fires weren't something you joked about in these woods. The conditions were dry enough for a flare-up to take out miles of forest. We made a report again over the radio, marked the location on our map, and kept working. The next few days passed without anything strange. We moved to another section of trail a bit further downhill, clearing a long washout where water had destroyed part of the switchback. Same routine: work, eat, sleep. But no one could stop thinking about that fire. One night, I overheard the two leads talking in hushed voices near the fire. I didn't catch much, but I remember one line: "If it happens again, we pack up." I didn't ask what they meant, but I figured it out soon enough. A week after the first sighting, almost to the hour, it happened again. Same glow, same ridge, same quiet flicker in the dark. This time, none of us slept. We all hiked up as a group just after dawn. The same black circle was there, almost identical to the first one. But this time, in the center of the burned patch, we found something else. A deer carcass, burned. Not totally gone, just seared and blackened along the outside, like it had been rolled in fire. But what was worse was the way it was arranged. Legs splayed out in straight lines, had turned sharply to one side, mouth open wide. The body had been positioned in a pattern. A symbol, maybe, one I didn't recognize. The legs formed angles too straight to be natural. We all just stood there for a long time, not saying anything. Eventually, the lead pulled out his radio again. Called it in. This time, someone answered. They told us to take photos, mark the location, and pack out early. They said someone from the Forest Service would meet us at the trailhead. No explanation. No questions. We packed up in silence. No one wanted to be there another night. We were supposed to stay 3 more days, but nobody argued. We hiked out in one long push, almost 10 miles in a single afternoon. When we got to the trailhead, 2 trucks were waiting. One from the Forest Service, the other unmarked. 2 guys got out. One in uniform, the other in plain clothes with a clipboard. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't smile. They asked us to show them the photos. Asked where we found the fire, how far from camp, what direction it was facing. Then they told us to delete the photos. Not just from our phones, but from any backups. They asked to see our phones and checked them. One guy stood there while each of us deleted the images. No one said no. No one wanted to push back. We were tired, unsettled, and just wanted to go home. When I got back to town, I looked up anything I could about fires in that area. I found nothing recent. No reports. No news. I even checked the Forest Service incident logs. The only thing listed for that week was a routine trail maintenance note. No mention of mysterious campfires. No animal carcasses. Nothing. I still think about the way that deer looked. Not just dead, but posed. Like someone or something wanted it seen that way. Like a message. I've done other trips since then. Camped in different forests. Hiked further, deeper. But I've never volunteered again. And I never go out there without checking satellite images now. I scan for shapes in the trees, dark patches and clearings, anything that looks like a circle where it shouldn't be. I still don't know who, or what, was building those fires. But I know they weren't accidents. And I know we weren't meant to see them. I've hiked the Laurel Bluff Loop in Tennessee more times than I can count. It's a well-marked, moderate loop, just under 9 miles, and I know it like the back of my hand. I started doing it back in college, and even after moving away, I'd come back every year just to walk it again. Same parking area, same warm-up incline, same overlook with the wide view of the valley below. That morning was quiet, a little overcast, but warm enough to just wear a flannel over my shirt. I had a small day pack with water, snacks, a knife, and a map I never really looked at. I didn't even think to download an offline GPS because it never felt necessary. There was always enough signal, and the path was clear as day. The first mile or so was completely normal. Same routes jutting from the ground in the same spots I remembered. The first wooden bridge over the creek looked freshly repaired, but otherwise familiar. I passed the clearing where a big pine had fallen years ago, and I remember thinking how it had decayed more since the last time. It was comforting, like catching up with an old friend. But around mile 3, something fell off. I walked past a section where I expected to see a group of 3 large boulders stacked oddly near a bend. But there were no boulders, just flat ground, like nothing had ever been there. I stopped, looked around, turned back a few feet, then forward again. I was sure I hadn't missed a turn, but still, it nagged at me. Further ahead, I should have hit a wide overlook with a big flat rock where I always sat and had a snack. But the trail just kept going through dense trees. No break in the canopy, no view. Just more brush and more trail. I stopped again, pulled out the map. According to my pace and the landmarks I did pass, I should have been right at the overlook. But it just wasn't there. At that point, I figured I'd misremembered things, or that maybe a storm had changed the layout somehow, washed out a slope or something. I kept walking, slower now, paying more attention. But the weirdness only deepened. About 15 minutes later, I came to a fork. It looked official, wooden sign, same style the park used, but there had never been a fork on this loop. I stared at the sign for a long time. It even had the name of the loop on it, carved into the wood. But the arrow was pointing left, the opposite direction from what I knew. I stood there, trying to make sense of it. I pulled out the map again and traced my finger along the trail. There was no fork like this. Not anywhere. That's when I started getting nervous. Not scared. Not yet, but unsettled in a way I couldn't shake. I turned around and started back the way I came. I figured maybe I had wandered off onto a side trail without realizing it. Maybe missed a turn. The idea felt stupid. I knew this loop better than any other trail I'd ever hiked, but it was the only explanation that made sense. Except when I walked back the way I came, things didn't line up. The fork I had just left behind didn't show up again. The trees were dense, unbroken. I slowed to a stop and checked the underbrush. There was no sign of a split, just solid forest, like the trail behind me had sealed itself up. That was when fear really started to set in. I kept walking anyway. I figured I must have somehow gotten turned around. Maybe I doubled back and was now headed forward again. I tried not to panic, but every time I thought I'd see something I recognized, I didn't. I saw logs across the path that had never been there before. The terrain was uneven where it used to be flat, and I didn't hear the highway hum you normally get near the trailhead, not even in the distance. I kept checking my watch, trying to gauge how far I'd gone. I figured I'd been walking at a steady pace, maybe 2.5 miles an hour. After 2 hours of walking, I still hadn't found a single landmark I recognized. Just trees. No trail signs, no painted markers on trees like the loop usually had every half mile or so. Even the birds were quiet. Eventually, I sat down on a rock and let myself panic for a minute. I didn't cry or anything, but I felt that hot, sharp edge of fear pushing in. I had water and a couple granola bars, but no signal. I checked my phone, just the spinning wheels searching. I waved it above my head, turned in circles, tried every trick I knew. Nothing. I didn't want to leave the trail. As confusing as it had become, bushwhacking through unknown forest was riskier. So I kept moving in the same direction, hoping something would break through the monotony. It was probably another 30 or 40 minutes when I noticed the trail starting to slope downward in a way that felt familiar. The trees thinned just a bit. I saw a small stream cutting across the path. The kind I remembered crossing on a wooden footbridge earlier. Except there was no bridge here. Just stones and wet mud. Still, it felt like the right area. I kept walking, and maybe 10 minutes later, I saw something that nearly made me drop to my knees. A red trail marker nailed to a tree. The same kind they used on the Laurel Bluff Loop. Then another 50 feet ahead. And then I saw the real trail. The wide, well-trod path, worn by years of hikers. It looked like a highway compared to the narrow, overgrown track I had been on. I stepped onto it like I was stepping into sunlight. My legs were shaking. I walked fast, almost jogging, for nearly half a mile until I saw a couple coming from the opposite direction. I didn't stop them. I wanted to, but I couldn't even figure out what I would say. So I just kept walking, pushing until I hit the trailhead. My car was there. A few others were too. Same gravel lot, same faded brown kiosk with a map nailed under plastic. I stood there for a while, drinking the rest of my water, staring at the loop outline on the map. It hadn't changed. There was no fork, no extra segment, nothing to suggest what I'd seen. Eventually, I went into the ranger station. I didn't file a report or anything. I just told the guy at the desk that I got lost off trail, ended up somewhere weird before finding my way back. He looked at me for a second, then shrugged and said, "You went too deep. Happens sometimes." That was it, like it was common knowledge. I nodded, thanked him, and left. I've thought about that hike a lot since then. I've tried to write it off as confusion, bad memory, maybe even temporary disorientation from dehydration or low blood sugar. But I've done that trail in every season, in every condition. I knew it. I know I didn't just make a wrong turn. Something about that section of forest doesn't follow the same rules. I wasn't hallucinating, and I wasn't lost in the normal sense. I went somewhere that looked like the trail, but wasn't. I haven't been back since. I still hike, different places, always with a GPS now, but not that loop. Not again. I don't think I could even find that fork if I tried. And part of me wonders what would have happened if I had kept going past it. If I hadn't turned around, maybe the trail would have vanished for good. Maybe I would have. I went backpacking with my friend Matt in Pennsylvania last spring. We'd planned a 3-day trip through a stretch of state forest we hadn't hiked before. It was one of those spots not too far from civilization, but still remote enough that you could go hours without seeing another person. The kind of place where the trails were clear but quiet, and the deeper you went, the more the trees swallowed the world around you. We both wanted something off-grid, just a break from the noise. The first day went fine. We hiked in about 10 miles from the trailhead, moving steady but not rushing it. Weather was decent, overcast, mid-50s, a little damp from rain earlier in the week, but not muddy. The forest was quiet, not much wind, just the occasional rustle of squirrels or birds darting through the underbrush. There was something calm about it, but also a little heavy. The way some parts of the trail dipped into hollows, and the air got stiller. Like sound didn't carry the same way out there. We set up camp just off the trail, near a shallow stream. Picked a flat spot beneath some hemlocks and cleared out the leaves. Got the tent staked down, filtered water, made a small fire. Everything felt normal. We ate, sat for a while just watching the last light fade, and then turned in maybe around 9:30 or so. Nothing unusual. No one else around that we'd seen all day. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. No reason at first, just that kind of alertness that creeps in like something nudged you awake. It was dark and dead silent outside, not even wind through the trees. I lay there for a second, thinking maybe I had to piss or that I dreamed something. Then I heard it, the sound of a zipper. Fast, hard, tearing open. It echoed faintly, like it was coming from maybe 100 yards away. It wasn't ours. We only had one tent, and both of us were inside it. A second later, there was a scream. It wasn't a yell or a shout for help. It was a raw, loud, ragged scream. Male, deep, and full of panic. It went on for maybe 5-6 seconds, then just cut off. No trailing off. No crying or rustling. Just silence, like someone had hit a switch. Then nothing. I didn't move at first. My whole body just went cold, heart hammering. I could feel Matt frozen next to me, breathing fast. We didn't say anything. Didn't need to. We both knew what we'd heard. I reached over slowly and grabbed the small radio from my pack. But there was no signal. Nothing. Just static. We waited. For what, I don't know. Maybe more sounds. Maybe someone calling out. But the woods stayed dead silent. Not even bugs chirping. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just lay there, eyes open, ears straining, trying to hear something, anything. But there was nothing. At first light, we packed up in minutes. Neither of us talked. We just moved fast, stuffing gear into our packs and stomping out the fire that had long since gone cold. We left the tent up and made our way toward where we thought the scream had come from. It took about 10 minutes of careful hiking. The forest was dense in that direction, with thick underbrush and small trees growing close together. We didn't see anything at first. Then we found it, a patch of ground where the leaves had been disturbed, flattened in a wide circle, maybe 10 or 15 feet across. Fresh. The dirt underneath looked slightly scuffed, like someone had been standing or pacing. But no tent, no gear, no footprints that led in or out clearly. Just the sense that something or someone had definitely been there. We searched around, not saying anything, but I could tell we were both trying to make sense of it. I kept expecting to find something, a shoe, maybe, or a strap from a pack. Anything. But there was nothing. No blood. No clothing. No broken branches or drag marks. Just that disturbed patch and the silence. We stood there a while, trying to decide what to do. Matt kept looking around, scanning the trees, like whoever had screamed might still be nearby. The air felt wrong there. Still and heavy again, like the forest was holding its breath. Eventually, we turned back. There was no point in staying. We didn't have service to call it in, and we sure as hell weren't going to keep hiking deeper into the woods after what we'd heard. We didn't even eat breakfast, just grabbed our packs and started hiking back the way we came. The hike out took most of the day. It should have felt longer, but we were moving fast. Barely stopped. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind us. We didn't talk much, just kept walking. We passed a few spots that had seemed peaceful on the way in, but now felt different. That silence was everywhere. It wasn't until we were maybe a mile from the trailhead that the forest started to feel normal again. I could hear birds. The air felt lighter. The wind moved through the trees again. Back at the trailhead, we finally got signal. Matt tried calling the state police, but the guy on the line didn't seem all that interested. Took the report, asked us to describe where we'd camped and what we heard, then said they'd send someone to check the area. I don't know if they ever did. We never heard back. That was the last backpacking trip I went on. Matt, too, far as I know. We both said we might try again someday, maybe with a group, but we never did. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. Something about how that scream sounded, like whoever it was had known it was coming. Like they weren't just afraid. They knew there was no way out. And the worst part was, nobody else cared. No news stories, no missing person bulletins, no follow-up. It was like it never happened. Like the woods swallowed it, same as they swallowed everything else. I think about that sometimes when I'm walking alone or lying in bed at night. Just how fast it happened. 1 second of noise in a sea of silence. Then nothing. Whatever happened out there, we were close. Close enough to hear it, but not close enough to stop it. And I still wonder what would have happened if we'd camped just a little further down the trail. I had a few days off work and wanted to get away from everything. No phone, no noise, no people. I'd been to the Adirondacks a few times before, but always stuck to the popular trails. This time I wanted something quieter. I parked my car at a small, unmarked pull-off off one of the side roads and grabbed my pack. I'd found the trail on an old hiking forum. Someone mentioned it years ago, said it was barely used, but still passable if you didn't mind overgrown brush. The trail started easy enough. Narrow, but clear. A little muddy in places, but nothing too bad. The trees were dense and tall, mostly pine and fir, and the ground was soft with old needles. I moved slow, enjoying the quiet. I didn't see a single person all morning. No hikers, no campers, nothing. That was what I wanted. Around noon, I stopped to eat. I sat on a flat rock, pulled out a sandwich, and listened. There wasn't much sound, just a few birds and the breeze through the trees. It was peaceful, the kind of silence you don't really get unless you're far out. After lunch, I kept going. The trail got rougher. It narrowed and dipped into a shallow ravine, then climbed again. I had to push through some thick brush, branches snapping underfoot. Somewhere along that stretch, I started to get the feeling I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I noticed something that made me stop. Every time I took a step, I heard another one behind me, just barely delayed. I stopped. The sound stopped. I walked again. The sound followed. It wasn't echo. I've hiked enough to know what my own steps sound like on different terrain. This was different, deliberate. I glanced back more than once, expecting to see someone. Nothing, just trees. A few broken branches from where I'd come through, but no one there. I kept walking, slower now. Every few minutes, I'd stop and listen. It was the same every time. When I stopped, the steps stopped. When I walked, they walked. After a while, it got into my head. I told myself it could be an animal, maybe a deer pacing me off the trail. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone was matching me, deliberately staying out of sight, staying just far enough behind. The light started to shift, that late afternoon orange tone sliding through the trees. I decided to turn back. I didn't want to get caught out there after dark, especially with how rough the trail was getting. As I made my way back, the footsteps didn't stop. They followed. Same distance, same rhythm. I tried to ignore it, kept telling myself it was nothing. That maybe someone else had found the trail too, was just trying to keep their distance. But then why not answer when I called out? I stopped again, turned around quickly, trying to catch whoever it was. Nothing. Just silence. I crouched down, trying to listen more closely. My own breathing sounded too loud. I held it and waited. For maybe a full minute, there was nothing. Then one single step. One crunch in the distance, like someone putting weight on a branch too thick to hide it. It came from off the trail, maybe 20 yards into the trees. I didn't move. Then another. And then silence again. That was enough. I adjusted my pack and started moving faster. My heart was thumping, and I felt this weird, tight pressure in my chest like I needed to run, but I didn't want to make it obvious. I kept up a fast pace, not quite jogging, but close. The trail felt longer on the way back. Everything looked a little different. I recognized a few down logs I'd stepped over earlier, but I started second-guessing turns. There weren't any markers out here. If I missed a split, I could easily get turned around. The footsteps were still there. Whenever I slowed down, they slowed. When I sped up, they matched. I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped my pack right on the trail and sprinted. I ran flat out for maybe 150 yards. My lungs burned. My boots slipped in the mud. Branches slapped my arms and face. I didn't stop until I physically couldn't keep going. I ducked behind a big tree and tried to listen. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just wind through the trees and my own panting breath. I stayed crouched there for a long time. Minutes, probably. I didn't hear anything else. I didn't want to wait longer than I had to, though. I wanted out. When I got back to my pack, it was exactly where I'd left it. No signs it had been touched. I slung it back on and kept walking, this time not even pretending to go slow. I just wanted out of the woods. It took me another 40 minutes to get back to the road. The trees finally broke, and I saw my car parked up ahead. Just seeing it made my shoulders drop a little. I jogged the last stretch and clicked my key fob to unlock it. I opened the driver door, tossed my pack into the back seat, and just stood there for a second, leaning on the frame. My shirt was soaked through, and my legs were shaking. Then I looked up. There, right in the middle of the rear windshield, was a single muddy handprint. It wasn't mine. I hadn't touched the glass at all, and even if I had, I was clean when I left. This was fresh, wet like it had been placed there just a few minutes ago. Long fingers, narrow palm. The mud had little bits of pine needle and grit in it. I checked the rest of the car. Doors locked. No sign of forced entry. I looked around the road. Nobody. No tire tracks but mine. No sign anyone had been nearby. Just that handprint. I took a picture of it with my phone, then wiped it off with a towel I keep in the trunk. I didn't want to leave it there. I drove straight back to town, didn't stop. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't even sure what I'd say. I kept thinking about how the footsteps had stopped when I ran. How they'd been silent after that. Like whoever it was had let me go. Or had taken a shortcut. Gotten ahead of me. I still don't know what they wanted. I don't know if they meant to scare me, or if they were watching for something else. But that handprint, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a signature, like someone wanted me to know they'd been that close. I haven't hiked alone since. I was hiking alone in Oregon, somewhere deep in the Willamette National Forest. I'd taken a week off work and decided to spend a few days exploring a less-used trail I'd found through a small backpacking forum. It wasn't marked on any of the major maps, but a few people had uploaded photos. Thick woods, narrow switchbacks, a couple of stream crossings. It looked quiet, isolated, just what I needed. I packed light, brought enough food for 3 days, a water filter, and my tent. I parked my car off a gravel road and started in early. The trail was barely visible most of the time, overgrown with ferns and moss-covered branches, but it felt peaceful. Just the sound of birds, insects, and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Oregon forests have this way of swallowing sound. Even when there's life all around you, it still feels silent. I hiked most of the day, stopped once for lunch beside a small stream, then kept going until I found a flat enough area to pitch my tent. It was maybe 4 or 5 in the evening when I set up. I ate, drank, and sat against a log until the light started to fade. I crawled into my sleeping bag and fell asleep listening to the wind. The next day, I left my camp behind and just brought a small day pack, water, a snack, and my phone, though I hadn't had signal since about 20 minutes after leaving the car. I kept pushing deeper. The trail climbed steeply for a bit and then leveled out along a ridge. There were no signs of other people, no trash, no footprints, no broken branches. It felt like I was the only person who'd been there in a long time. That was the best part. That silence, that distance from everything and everyone. That's when I saw the mirror. It was around mid-afternoon. The sun was coming in at a low angle through the trees, slicing across the trail in thin beams. I remember squinting a bit as the light hit something ahead, something bright. As I got closer, I saw it was a mirror nailed to the trunk of a tall pine, right at about eye level. Just an ordinary mirror, maybe the size of a dinner plate, with a thin wood frame around it. It was clean, not dusty or fogged up like you'd expect out there. It reflected the forest behind me clearly, crisp and bright. It was just strange. There were no signs of anything else around. No trail markers. No campsite. Just that one mirror in the middle of nowhere. I stopped in front of it for a while, looked at my own face, the trees over my shoulder. Then I got curious. The mirror was obviously facing something. Mirrors point toward something, right? So I turned around to see what it was looking at. Nothing. Just more woods, ferns, old stumps. No signs, no markings, not even a clearing. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, just staring, trying to figure out what the purpose of it was. Then I turned back toward the mirror. There was someone standing behind me. My breath caught. I remember the weight of it, like my whole chest locked up. In the mirror, just over my shoulder, maybe 10 feet back, was a figure. Not moving, not speaking, just standing, facing me. I could see their outline, the shape of their head, the folds of what looked like a hood or jacket. Every detail was perfectly still. I spun around immediately. Nothing, just the trees. No sound, no crunch of leaves, no running. I scanned everything, turning in a slow circle. I even walked a few feet in the direction the figure had been. Still nothing. I turned back to the mirror, heart racing. It only showed trees now. My own reflection was trembling. I waited a minute, then another. My ears were straining, trying to hear anything at all. The forest was still. but I couldn't shake it. What I saw had been clear. Too clear to be a shadow or illusion. And that's when I got the worst feeling I've ever had. Someone had placed that mirror there. On purpose. It was clean, like someone had wiped it recently. It hadn't been left to weather and age. And it wasn't there to reflect themselves. It faced away, toward where someone might be walking, like bait or surveillance. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and started walking fast. Not quite running, but close. I didn't even pull out my map or check the GPS on my phone. I just followed the trail back the way I came, checking behind me every couple of seconds. I could feel the adrenaline burning through my arms and legs. Every time I stepped on a twig, I flinched. Every time I brushed past a branch, I thought I heard footsteps. At one point, I stopped to catch my breath. I was sure I heard something, soft footsteps just behind me, like someone was keeping pace, but only just far enough to stay out of sight. I turned sharply. Still nothing. It took me hours to get back to camp. I didn't stop for food or water. I grabbed my gear, stuffed everything into my pack without packing it properly, and pushed on toward the road. The last couple miles were a blur. All I remember was moving fast and not looking anywhere but the trail in front of me. I finally got back to the car around dusk. It was still there, untouched. I threw my pack into the back seat, locked the doors, and didn't even change out of my hiking boots before starting the engine. I drove until I hit a gas station an hour away. Only when I got inside, surrounded by people and lights, did I feel like I could breathe again. That night, in a cheap motel off the highway, I tried to make sense of it. I even told myself it had to be a trick of the light, a reflection of a tree stump or a backpack, something my brain mistook for a person in the moment. But deep down, I know what I saw. That outline, the posture, it was someone. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how carefully placed that mirror was. It wasn't random. It was set up at the exact right height and angled to catch a person's reflection from the trail, to let someone watching know when someone passed by, or to give someone a second to see who was behind them if they had reason to look. I checked hiking forums afterward, looked for anything about mirrors in the woods, that specific area, even the coordinates I'd marked on my GPS before the signal dropped. Nothing. No one ever mentioned it. I never went back. I still hike sometimes, but only on well-used trails and never alone. That part of Oregon is just a blank spot on my map now. I don't want to know who put that mirror there. I don't want to know why. And I sure as hell don't want to know who, or what, was standing behind me when I looked into it. Maybe it was someone living out there. Maybe a hunter, or someone trying to scare people. Maybe it was just a sick joke. But whoever they were, they didn't want to be seen directly. Only through glass. And I don't think they expected me to turn around. I had booked a few nights at a remote ranger cabin deep in the Sawtooth National Forest in Idaho. It was one of those old Forest Service cabins you can rent if you plan ahead. Rustic, no electricity, no running water, and no cell service. You drive in a few miles on a dirt road, then hike the last stretch in. The closest town was over an hour away. I wanted peace and solitude, a reset from everything. I brought food, firewood, a water filter, my sleeping bag, a lantern, and a couple books. I had planned to stay 4 nights. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees, with a narrow trail leading in. There was a fire pit out front, a wooden porch with a couple of creaky steps, and a small window on each side of the single-room building. Inside was a cot, a wood stove, a table, and some shelves with leftover supplies, matches, an old pot, a rustic can opener. Simple, quiet, and exactly what I was looking for. The first day went by peacefully. I unpacked, gathered some kindling from around the cabin, and started a small fire in the stove once the sun dipped. I made dinner, read a little, then settled in. I fell asleep around 10, wrapped in my bag on the cot with the fire still popping quietly. It was cold outside, and there were no other lights, no headlights, no distant porch lamps. Just the dark pressing against the windows. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. It was faint at first, so faint I thought maybe I was dreaming. A whistling sound, soft, just 3 notes. Then silence. Then the same three-note whistle again. It repeated a few times, maybe 6 or 7. Always the same notes, slow and deliberate. I sat up, heart starting to beat a little harder. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and the cabin was nearly pitch black. I didn't move. I just sat there in my sleeping bag, listening. The sound wasn't close. It seemed to be coming from the woods, maybe 100 feet off. I couldn't tell the direction. Sound bounces weird in the forest at night. It didn't go on long. After a few more repetitions, it stopped. Nothing else. No footsteps, no twigs snapping, no other sounds. I stayed awake for over an hour before finally drifting off again. I figured maybe it was a bird, some owl or strange night creature. That's what I told myself, even though the sound felt off. Too rhythmic, too human. The next morning was cold and gray. I made coffee on the little propane stove I'd brought and tried to shake off the feeling from the night before. There were no footprints outside, just deer tracks near the edge of the clearing and a few squirrel prints closer in. I went for a short hike along one of the logging roads that cut through the area, then came back and read most of the afternoon. It was quiet again. No planes overhead, no wind, just the trees swaying and the occasional rustle from some animal passing through. That night, I went to bed earlier, around 9. I didn't feel scared exactly, just alert. I left the fire going and made sure my hatchet was near the door, though I wasn't sure why. I lay in the dark for a long time, half asleep, until I heard it again. The same whistle, same 3 notes, but louder this time, and closer, much closer. It was maybe 30 or 40 feet from the cabin. Same rhythm, over and over. No rush to it, just that same slow whistle. It lasted longer than the night before, at least 10 minutes. I lay perfectly still. The fire was down to embers again, and the inside of the cabin felt colder than before. I didn't move. I didn't get up to look out the window. I just waited. Eventually, it stopped. Again, no footsteps. No other noise. Just silence. And after a while, I finally fell asleep again, though it wasn't a deep sleep. By the 3rd day, I was thinking about leaving early. I didn't want to admit it, but I was uneasy. I'd stayed in backcountry cabins before, even gone winter camping in Alaska, but something about this felt different. It wasn't wildlife. I knew the sounds animals made. This wasn't that. That evening, I didn't light a fire. I didn't turn on a lantern. I ate cold food straight out of the can. I didn't want any light showing through the windows. I sat in the dark, fully dressed, boots on, back against the wall where I could see both windows and the door. I wanted to know if it came again, how close it would get. I wanted to listen. And for a long time, there was nothing. Then, right around midnight, the whistling started again. No warning, just those 3 slow notes. But this time, it was right outside the clearing, maybe 20 feet from the porch. The sound came through the walls like it was aimed at the cabin. It repeated again and again, every few seconds. Same whistle, then silence, and then footsteps, slow, heavy, on the porch. I sat frozen, not breathing. Just a few steps, like someone walking carefully, deliberately. Then came a knock. Just one. Soft, almost gentle. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't turn on a light. I just sat there, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Nothing else happened. I waited and waited. It felt like hours, but it was probably just one. Eventually, the light outside the window shifted. Faint dawn. I stayed put until the sun was fully up, then I finally opened the door. There was no one on the porch, but in the dirt at the bottom of the steps were 2 bare footprints. Human, adult-sized, clear as day in the dry soil. No shoes, no socks, just feet. The tracks came up the steps, but there were no prints leading away. The ground was hard-packed in most places, and the pine needles made it easy to miss light tracks. But these 2 prints at the base of the steps were clear. No others nearby. I packed everything up. I didn't eat. I didn't even refill my water. I shoved it all into my pack, swept the cabin floor out of habit, and left. I hiked fast, heart racing with every step, glancing over my shoulder more times than I can count. When I got back to my car at the trailhead, it was still early morning. Nothing looked disturbed. I drove the whole way back to town without stopping. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? Someone whistled outside a cabin. There was a knock on the door, but I'll never forget those 3 notes. The way they got closer each night. The way they stopped just before the footsteps started. The bare footprints in the dirt. I haven't gone back to a Forest Service cabin since. I hiked deep into the north woods of Maine, not far from the Canadian border. I had parked on a gravel pull-off and followed a faint trail that curved past old birch trees, across creeks, and through thickets of spruce and fir. It was early September, cool but still green, and the bugs had mostly died down. I had enough gear for 3 nights out, nothing fancy. Just me, my pack, my boots, and the usual backwoods instincts. I'd planned to make camp near a lake I'd seen on topo maps, a place I couldn't even find a name for online. By the second day, I hadn't seen anyone. No boot tracks, no wrappers, no cut stumps. It felt like I was the only person to come through in a long time. That's part of why I stopped when I saw the tents. It was late afternoon. I'd just come over a small ridge, nothing dramatic, just a hump in the terrain, and I saw flashes of color down below. Green, blue, and red nylon. Tents. 4 of them, in a wide clearing maybe 20 yards across. The area was surprisingly well set up. Flat ground, a fire ring with ashes in it, logs dragged over to sit on. Cooking pots hanging from a line strung between 2 trees. Food in a bear hang about 15 feet up. Water bottles. A few fold-out chairs around the fire ring. There was even a neatly stacked pile of firewood against one of the trees. It looked lived in, but no one was there. At first, I thought they'd gone off hiking or maybe swimming somewhere nearby. But there was no sound. Not a branch snap, not a laugh, not even a bird chirp. And no bags either. No big packs, no duffels, no day packs. Nothing that would hold gear. Which was strange because everything else was there. Who leaves water bottles half full? There was a jet boil still sitting on a flat rock by the fire pit, lighter beside it. A couple of plastic mugs with dried coffee rings. Someone had opened a pack of jerky and left it half-eaten in the chair. All signs pointed to people being there just recently, but no one was. I stood in the middle of the clearing for a while, just listening. No wind, no insects buzzing, just the hush of trees and sky. I didn't want to touch anything. It felt wrong, like I'd stumbled into something I shouldn't be seeing. I walked around the site, quietly, not calling out, just observing. Each tent was zipped shut, but I didn't open them. I don't know why. I think part of me didn't want to find anything inside. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of animals, no footprints heading off into the woods. It was like 4 or 5 people had been sitting around a fire, stood up at the same time, and walked away without bags, without food, without their bottles, and never came back. I kept circling the site slowly, waiting for something to make sense. There were no vehicles, not even an ATV trail nearby. I checked my map. The nearest logging road was 4 miles west, so they'd either hiked in or been dropped off. But then why no gear? I didn't stay long. Just long enough to be sure I wasn't imagining it. I backed away slowly, kept my eyes on the clearing, then turned and walked fast. I didn't run, I didn't want to trip, but I didn't stop either. That night, I camped miles away, off trail, deep in a stand of young pines. I didn't sleep well. Every twig snap made me sit up. Every breeze through the trees made me think I was hearing footsteps. I hiked out the next morning, earlier than I'd planned. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. It gnawed at me, not because something supernatural had happened. I don't believe in that crap, but because it didn't make any sense. It felt like walking into someone's house and finding it fully lit, music playing, dinner half-eaten on the table, but no one there. Just a quiet emptiness that doesn't line up with how things work. When I got back home, I looked it up. I searched forums. I called the ranger station for that region, told them I'd found an abandoned campsite that looked like someone left in a hurry. They asked for coordinates, which I gave them. I asked if any groups had gone missing recently. Any search and rescues. Anything weird? They said no. No missing hikers. No SAR operations in that area this season. They thanked me for the info, said they'd check it out, but I never heard back. A week later, I couldn't get it out of my head, so I went back. I took the same trail, hit all the same markers, followed my notes from the first trip. I remembered the ridge, the trees, the direction I turned when I saw the tents. But this time, the clearing was empty. No tents, no chairs, no fire pit, no stacked wood. The ground was undisturbed, just ferns, moss, and a few deer tracks. Not even a sign that someone had cleared a spot to camp there. It was like it had never been used. I spent hours double-checking my location. I walked a half mile in every direction just to make sure I wasn't off. But I knew the spot. The hill, the angle of the light through the trees, even the scarred birch I'd leaned against while looking at the camp. It was the right place. But the camp was gone. I kept looking online, but nothing came up. No one else reporting it. No forums mentioning a group disappearing. No news stories. No names. It was like whatever I'd seen had never existed outside my memory. For a while, I tried convincing myself I'd just stumbled on a temporary hunting camp and they'd packed up before I came back. But that doesn't make sense. You don't leave half your food out. You don't leave a half-cooked meal on the rock by the fire. You don't leave your chairs. You don't leave a full water filter still dripping into a jug. I don't have a theory that explains it all. I don't think it was anything paranormal, but I also don't think it was nothing. Maybe it was a group doing something off-grid they weren't supposed to be doing. Maybe someone scared them off. Maybe they left on foot because they had to, and someone cleaned the site up fast. But why wouldn't there be a single trace left? Not even a burn ring from the fire pit? I don't go out there anymore. I still hike, still camp, just not in that part of the state. That spot feels wrong. Like a memory that's too clear, but no one else can confirm. I didn't take photos, didn't think to at the time. All I have is what I saw and what I didn't see. I know it was real. I know what I saw, and I know that camp shouldn't have been there. But it was. Just once. Then never again. I took a few days off work to clear my head and do a solo camping trip in Washington. Nothing extreme, just a quiet few days in the woods with no signal, no emails, no noise. I picked a spot I'd found on a hiking forum, a lesser-known trail that looped off into a valley full of pine and spruce. Supposedly quiet, remote, and good for solitude. Exactly what I was looking for. I parked at the gravel trailhead around 10 a.m., strapped on my pack, and hiked in. The weather was cool and overcast, the air thick with the earthy smell of moss and old rain. The trail wasn't marked, but it was worn enough that I didn't need a map. Just a winding dirt path, sometimes interrupted by roots or slick rocks, weaving through trees that felt like they'd been standing for centuries. I walked for a few hours, not really rushing, just moving slow and steady. Around early afternoon, I came across a clearing off-trail, maybe a couple hundred feet from the main path. I almost missed it. There was a break in the trees and a faint footpath leading off to the side. It was curiosity more than anything that made me check it out. When I stepped through the brush, I stopped in my tracks. The clearing was perfect. Flat, dry ground surrounded by tall evergreens, soft grass underfoot, and best of all, already set up. Someone had pitched a dark green two-person tent dead center. A fire pit made of stone sat a few feet from it, cold and gray. Next to the tent was a small pile of gear, a backpack, some cookware, even a foldable camping chair. Nothing looked messy or ransacked. It all looked like someone had just stepped away for a short hike. I waited a while at the edge of the clearing, called out once, but no answer came back. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, I figured the camper would return soon. Maybe they'd gone to get water or explore nearby. I didn't want to set up right next to their site, so I stayed a little off to the side, leaning against a tree with my pack on the ground. Figured I'd wait an hour or two before moving on. But no one came back. Time passed slowly. A few birds moved through the trees. Wind stirred the leaves now and then, but there was no sign of life beyond that. No voices. No crunch of boots. No sounds of anyone moving through the woods. I checked the fire pit. The ashes were cold. Not just cooled down cold, cold like they'd been that way for a day or two. The gear hadn't been touched. No footprints. No signs of anyone returning. That's when something started to feel wrong. I walked slowly over to the tent. I didn't want to, but I felt like I had to know. If the person was hurt or had wandered off, maybe there was a note or something inside. I unzipped it and leaned in. There was just one sleeping bag, unzipped and spread out. A pillow, perfectly clean. No dirt, no pine needles, nothing that said someone had used it recently. It didn't smell musty or sweaty, just clean. And then I noticed a small bump underneath the sleeping bag, right in the center. I pulled the sleeping bag aside. There was a trail camera, black, mounted on a short tripod, pointing directly at the tent entrance. I froze. The lens stared up at me like an eye. I stepped back, carefully zipped the tent shut, and just stood there for a second. My heart was suddenly beating a lot faster. The camera hadn't been hidden. It was just barely concealed under the sleeping bag, like someone wanted it to be out of sight, but still capturing anyone who entered. I don't know why, but something about that made my skin crawl more than anything else. I packed up my gear immediately. No hesitation. I didn't even bother to eat or rest. Just strapped on my pack and got back on the trail, heading the way I came. I walked fast. Probably too fast because I kept tripping over rocks and snagging my boots on roots. I didn't care. I just wanted out. Maybe a mile down the trail, I noticed something else. There was a small black shape mounted high up on a tree to my right. At first, I thought it was just a birdhouse or maybe part of a marker, but when I stopped and looked closer, I realized it was another trail camera. Same kind as the one under the sleeping bag, mounted maybe 10 feet up, angled downward toward the trail. Watching, I scanned the trees around me. After a minute, I found another one, then another. All pointed toward the trail, mounted at odd intervals. Some were low, others high. Some were in plain sight, others partially hidden behind branches. I don't know how many I saw, 6, maybe 7, before I stopped counting. They weren't government or Park Service cameras. I've seen those before. These were more discreet, like something a hunter or a private landowner might use. But they were everywhere, and I hadn't noticed a single one on my way in, only on the way out. It felt like I was walking through a monitored corridor, like I'd stepped into something I was never supposed to see. I kept moving. Didn't stop again, didn't drink water, didn't look back. The trail felt longer going out, like it was stretching under my feet. Every time I heard a branch snap or leaves rustle, my body tensed up. I kept thinking someone would step out behind me. Or worse, I'd see someone ahead, just standing still on the path, waiting. But no one ever did. When I finally got back to the parking area, my car was still the only one there. No new tracks, no fresh tire marks. Just my dusty sedan, sitting alone under the overcast sky. I tossed my pack in the back seat, got in, and locked the doors without even thinking. I didn't start the car for a minute. Just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing hard, listening to the quiet. Eventually, I started it and drove. I didn't stop until I was halfway back to the city. I never reported what I found. I didn't know what to say. There was a nice campsite with no one in it and a bunch of trail cameras watching the woods. Doesn't sound like much. But something about it felt very wrong. I've been camping most of my life. I've been in all kinds of remote places. I've seen abandoned gear, broken tents, even weird trash left behind. But this was different. That campsite was too clean. The gear too perfect. No bugs inside the tent. No food wrappers. No sign of any real human presence. Just enough to make it look like someone was there. And the camera, under the sleeping bag, like someone wanted to see who would unzip the tent. Like the whole thing was bait. I haven't gone solo camping since. Maybe I will again, someday, but not in Washington. Not anywhere near that trail. I deleted the GPS coordinates I'd saved and wiped the trail map from my phone. Some places are meant to be left alone. It started as just another weekend plan. I had a few days off from work and wanted to clear my head. Life had been loud lately, city noise, endless emails, the constant buzz of everything. I needed silence, the kind you only get deep in the woods. So, I packed my gear and drove out to a patch of state forest I'd only been to once before. It wasn't far, maybe a 3-hour drive, but it was isolated enough that you wouldn't see many other hikers once you went in a couple miles. I arrived around noon and parked off a narrow gravel road that split off from the highway. There were no other cars there. That was perfect. I had printed maps, a compass, GPS on my phone, and backup batteries. I wasn't careless. I planned to make a wide loop trail that would take about 2 days to hike. Nothing extreme, just long walks through woods, sleeping under the stars, maybe cooking some instant rice and tuna over a camp stove. The first few miles were smooth. Tall pines on either side, ferns and moss at my feet. The smell of earth and pine sap was thick in the air. The trail narrowed and curved like it had a mind of its own. Birds chirped occasionally. I passed a small stream around mile 4 and refilled my water. I stopped once to eat a granola bar and kept walking. The further I went, the quieter it got. Not dead silent, just more still. No wind. Fewer birds. The trees felt taller, closer. At some point, I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in a while, but I wasn't worried. I had the map and GPS. I checked both, and I was still on track, maybe a little off to the right of the trail, but the area was open enough that I wasn't concerned. Sometimes trails shifted or eroded. I've hiked enough to know that. I found a good clearing to set up camp just before sunset. No sign of other people. Just a circle of packed earth and dry leaves surrounded by trees that leaned slightly inward. I didn't think much of it at the time. I set up the tent, boiled some water, ate a quick dinner, and watched the sky fade to black. That night, I heard something. Not close, just movement. Branches snapping lightly, not the heavy crack of something big, just intermittent soft snaps. I've heard deer, foxes, even raccoons do that. It didn't bother me, but it didn't stop either. It kept going, slowly circling the area. Always at a distance, always just outside the ring of trees I could see through. I stayed in my tent listening. It went on until maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. Then nothing. Just the usual cricket sounds and the occasional owl. I thought it was weird, but not enough to pack up early. I told myself it was just normal forest stuff. Wild animals doing wild animal things. I didn't sleep much after that, though. Next morning, I made coffee and broke camp. I got moving early and tried to follow the map again. But almost right away, things fell off. There was a dip in the trail that shouldn't have been there, a shallow gully filled with leaves and a broken log lying across it. That wasn't on the map. Then about a mile later, I passed a rusted-out pickup truck deep in the woods, completely overgrown. No trail led to it. It had moss on the hood, ivy through the cab, flat tires sunken into the soil. That definitely wasn't on any trail guide. I marked the spot mentally, figuring I could check again on the map later. I moved on. The trees started changing. At first, it was gradual, less pine, more oak, and underbrush. But then it got denser. The trail narrowed, then disappeared entirely. I checked my phone. GPS was jumping. My location bounced around, sometimes 10 feet off, sometimes 200. I waited, hoping it would correct, but it didn't. I kept walking in what I thought was the right direction. The forest didn't look familiar anymore. It was thicker, darker, and there was a weird sameness to it, like someone copied and pasted the same trees every few feet. The light barely got through. I stopped and turned slowly in a circle. Nothing around me stood out. No landmarks. No distant hills. No streams or clearings. Just more trees, packed tight, stretching in every direction. I decided to backtrack to the truck. At least I knew where that was. But after 10 minutes of walking, I didn't see it. No gully, no rusted metal, no sign I had ever passed it. I turned again. Everything looked the same. The air felt heavy. I started sweating even though it wasn't hot. I forced myself to stay calm. I took out my compass and tried to find true north. It spun for a second, then steadied. I picked a direction and walked slowly, marking trees with a blade as I passed. Every 30 steps, I scratched a small notch into the bark at eye level. After maybe an hour of steady walking, I stopped for water. My mouth was dry and my legs were starting to ache. I looked around and tried to find my notches. I couldn't see a single one. I went back the way I thought I came and looked again. Nothing. No marks, no footprints, no broken twigs. It was like the woods swallowed every sign I had passed through. I stood still, heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just getting turned around. This felt wrong. I'd hiked off trail before. You always leave some trace. I started walking again. Faster now, less careful. Every so often I'd stop and shout, just in case someone was out there. But no answer came. Just trees. And that growing feeling in my stomach that something was watching me. Late afternoon, I found a tree stand. It was old and wooden, nailed high up on the side of a tall birch. The wood was gray and splintered. I climbed up, hoping to get a view. Maybe I'd spot the truck or the road or even my camp. I got to the top and sat there, panting, scanning the forest. Nothing. Just treetops and a sliver of orange where the sun was starting to set. But then I looked down. There were footprints at the base of the tree. Fresh ones. Deep heel prints in the soft dirt. Not mine. They were bigger, wider, made by heavy boots. The ground around them was disturbed, as if whoever made them had been pacing or circling the base of the tree. My chest tightened. I stayed up there until the sky went fully dark. Then I climbed down slowly, listening. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. I didn't bother trying to find the trail anymore. I just moved. Any direction felt as good as another. I kept going until I couldn't see my feet. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I just wrapped myself in my sleeping bag behind a fallen log and tried to stay low. I didn't light a fire. I didn't cook. I didn't eat. I just lay there, heart racing, ear straining. At some point in the night, I heard breathing. Not an animal panting. Not wind through trees. Breathing. Human, steady, a few yards away. I didn't move. It lasted maybe a minute. Then slow footsteps crunching leaves. Fading. Then gone. I stayed awake until dawn. By morning, I had a plan. I'd keep going until I found water, then follow it. Streams lead to rivers. Rivers lead to roads. That's what I told myself. I found water an hour later. A narrow creek running cold and fast. I followed it, slipping on rocks, brushing aside branches. I was scratched all over and exhausted. But I kept moving, kept looking for any sign of people. Around noon, I saw something. A tarp, faded blue, tied between trees. I almost cried. I ran toward it, but no one was there. Just a makeshift camp, a rotting sleeping bag, an empty food can, a small pile of stones arranged in a circle. On one of the trees, scratched into the bark, were the words, "Stay moving." There were no bags, no tools, no name, no ID. Just a sense that someone had been here and left in a hurry. I moved on. Later that day, I found a fence. It was metal, rusted, with barbed wire on top. It stretched in both directions as far as I could see. Beyond it, the forest thinned out into flat, empty land. I followed the fence for hours, hoping for a gate or a hole. Eventually, I found a section where a tree had fallen against it, bending the top wires low. I climbed over carefully, tearing my sleeve in the process. The forest ended about 100 yards beyond. There was a gravel road. Empty, but it was something. I waited until sunset. No cars. So I started walking. After maybe 6 miles, I saw a house. Old, paint peeling, but lived in. I knocked. A man in his 60s opened the door. He stared at me for a long time before finally stepping aside. He didn't ask what happened, just pointed to a chair and gave me water. Later, he told me that would stretch for nearly 40 miles in every direction. People get turned around in there, he said. Sometimes they come back out. Sometimes they don't. I asked him about the truck, the camp, the fence. He didn't say anything, just looked at me and shook his head like he didn't want to know. I slept in a real bed that night, called someone in the morning, got a ride back to my car. I didn't file any reports.